welcome back to the Crawl Room. We're here once again in this wonderful ranty room for all things Formula One. So, the Emilia Romagna Grand Prix has come to a close at Imola. And what could be said about the race this weekend? Well, a slow burner is how I would put it. Do you know what? I actually watched the whole race and I quite enjoyed it. Even though there wasn't actually that much on-track action or that much battling, I think it was just so refreshing not to hear David Croft's voice. Oh my God. It was just... Oh, just give me a minute. Just give me a minute. I'm just thinking about that. Oh God, David Croft not commentating. Oh, it's made me all fuzzy and warm inside. Yeah, it was nice and refreshing to not hear David Croft, let's put it that way. But the race in itself was rather mundane, wasn't it? Okay, we had that exciting last few laps where Lando was hunting down Max Verstappen, but ultimately it just wasn't enough. So if you've never seen this series before, I award the drivers out a maximum of 10 points based on their overall race weekend's performance. I go all the way down to 0 if they have a particularly bad one. Take a look out for bonus points though. They're sometimes an offer for some drivers to do something extra special during a race. And on the very rare occasion I do award minus points to those drivers to do something extra special, but for all the wrong reasons. Let's take a look at the current Crawl Room standings then going into this episode. It's on the screen now for you to take a look at. As always, have a look and see where your favourite driver is, and based on this race weekend's performance, do you reckon I'm going to be scoring them highly and they're going to be going up, or do you reckon I'm going to be scoring them badly and they're going to be on their way down? Let's take a look at the constructors' standings as well, of course. They're up on the screen as well for you now to have a look at. And again, with the constructors, it's all based on what the drivers do, but I can influence this as and when I feel necessary. If I think that the teams deserve more points because the drivers are under-delivering, or if I feel the team is under-delivering, then I can knock points off of them. But at the moment, everything's as it is. I've knocked a couple of points off of Williams and off of Sauber, but for the most part, the points are the points on there at the moment, but we'll see how we go as the season progresses. So let's kick things off with the race winner then, shall we? Max Verstappen, yes, again, we know. But this is now where you have to look at Max and go, yeah, he didn't have a comfortable weekend, did he? It didn't all go his own way, and that sounds really daft considering he got the pole and he got the win. You know, it's a weird thing to say, but ultimately, that is what happened. He had it tough. If it hadn't have been for Nico Hulkenberg finishing his lap as Max was starting his, which gave him a tow all the way down the straight into turn 1, then that fraction of a second that he was ahead of Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri, ultimately Piastri got the penalty, but we could have seen him effectively line up P3 there, elevated to P2, as opposed to actually qualifying on pole. You know, less than a 10 separated him at the end there, so that made all the difference. And in the race itself, the Red Bull looked more comfortable on the medium and on heavier fuel load at the start, but by the end on that harder compound tyre and on the lighter fuel load, that McLaren was a lot better. So it's interesting to see how the season and the dynamics going to play out with that, but McLaren are on form and McLaren are going to be threatening Red Bull for a lot more this season. But for Max Verstappen's race overall, it was solid, but it wasn't the usual Max Verstappen level. And yes, some people can say, yeah, but Max delivered the most out of it he could with the car he was given. But at the end of the day, he's in a Red Bull, and he should be delivering these results, and it shouldn't be this tough. And I know I'm going to be really harsh, but as always, when we have drivers that are always up at the front, I have to find ways to criticise them to make it fair for the drivers that are further down the field, squabbling for nothing effectively sometimes. But yeah, you know, overall this weekend, Max Verstappen, we saw chinks in his armour because he wasn't comfortable with the car, and that's a little bit concerning. I mean, don't worry, he's still got the championship wrapped up, Max Verstappen fans. Jesus Christ, you know, it's still a given because he's got that much of a deficit already that if it does go drastically wrong, he's still got the cushion. But for Max Verstappen overall this race weekend, I am going to score him 7.5. 7.5 to Max Verstappen for this weekend overall. Yeah, it was pole. Yeah, it was a win. But it wasn't comfortable by any stretch of the imagination, and he had to fight for it. And some could say, yeah, but he fought for it and succeeded. I'm looking at it as the sense that it was uncomfortable and it maybe shouldn't have been that stressful. That's just my perspective on things, and that's why it's 7.5 to Max Verstappen. In second place, we come to Lando Norris. He has felt and tasted the victory. He knows what it's like to win in Formula 1 now, and he wants to win again. He was hunting down Max, wasn't it? It was just that lap 58 or 59, wasn't it? Where he just overdrove. He got sort of within like 1.4 seconds, and you're like, if he has a good lap this lap, he'll get within DRS. But as it was, he was scruffy, he was on the ragged edge, he was clipping the gravel, he was chinking the car. You could see him correcting mistakes, and he was really on the edge, which was impressive to see on board, don't get me wrong. But that lap, he lost 4 or 5 tenths, and then it took him a couple of laps to get that back again. Then on the final couple of laps, he got within the DRS and tried to put a charge on at the end. Now, had it not been for that overdriving on that lap 58-59 period, we could have seen him in the DRS a lot sooner, and we maybe could have seen a couple of laps for Lando to have a go at victory in DRS, not just the final lap. So, I don't want to discredit Lando at all, because my God, he was trying, wasn't he? He was pushing to the ragged edge. What could we say really about his race weekend? Lining up P3, just slightly out-qualified by Piastri, but started in P2 as a result of Piastri's penalty for blocking. But, he drove well, didn't he? He drove well. As already mentioned with Max, the McLaren didn't look as good on the heavier fuel load and medium tyre combination, but on the hard tyres with lighter fuel load, that McLaren was rapid. Maybe another couple of laps, but maybe he could have given himself those couple of laps by not having that ragged lap 58-59. Could have closed in sooner. Maybe, just maybe. Hypothetical as always. But Lando Norris, what a mighty season he's having. And McLaren with the mighty updates. It makes me scared for this wind tunnel upgrade that is going to come. They're building a new wind tunnel, which will be coming live sometime during this season. They're hoping after the summer break, this new wind tunnel will be live. McLaren, if you're listening, anyone's listening from McLaren, stick with what you know works at the moment. I know you might have an old wind tunnel, it needs redevelopment, etc. But it's working. Every upgrade you bring, what it says it's going to do in a random generated form in the ethos of nothing, calculates to actual on-track performance. Do you really want to be sticking your car in a new wind tunnel and the bits you're upgrading in a new wind tunnel that you don't fully understand? I don't know. I wouldn't fix what's not broken, to be honest with you. That's just me personally. But yeah, Lando Norris at the moment driving mightily fast and impressively. McLaren doing a stunning job, and for Lando Norris it's 9 points. 9 points on the board to him for that. I am just knocking that 1 point off for that ever so exuberant lap 58-59, because maybe had he just bided his time a little bit more, he could have just maybe caught up by a couple of tenths and then chipped away more solidly there, as opposed to recover the half a second he lost during that lap. So anyway, that's that, but no discredit to Lando Norris. He's tasted victory, he wants to taste it again. It's coming soon, isn't it? 9 points to Lando Norris. In third place we come to oh, sacre bleu, la. Tasted the bubbly for Ferrari at one of their home Grand Prix, of course. Fantastic effort to see. I believe this is Ferrari's first podium at the Imola circuit since 2006 with Michael Schumacher. So it's been a long time coming, and it has been nicely to see that Charles Leclerc has delivered once again the most he could out of the weekend. Was he expected to beat the McLarens? Well, Ferrari would have been hoping for him to do so, so the fact he beat one has to be commended. Again, in this first phase of the race, heavy fuel load, medium tyre combination, it looked solid, that Ferrari, didn't it? But it just didn't have the answer to this, again, the hard tyre and low fuel compound that McLaren was able to deliver. That was what was really... the fundamental success to McLaren's weekend this weekend overall was that towards the end. So Leclerc picking up a podium, fantastic effort overall. Not really much could be said about his race. He had the match for his teammate pretty much all race this weekend as well. And drove smart, drove clever. P3, realistically the most he could get out of it. Probably lucky that Piastri did get the penalty, because I think without that it'd have been a double McLaren podium. But yeah, he picked up the pieces where he could, and it's 9 points to Shalala for that. Fantastic effort by him, and deserves commending. Nice to see Ferrari in and around in the mix, but just fell short when it came to the overall competition towards the end. But they're in the mix, and that's encouraging. 9 to Leclerc. Fourth place, and just off of the podium positions, it is Oscar Piastri in the second of the McLarens. What a solid weekend by McLaren this weekend. It was unlucky and unfortunate, wasn't he, in Miami with what happened there. He could have had a good chunk of points there, but it went begging. This time around, he caused his own troubles, didn't he, after a stunning P2 qualifying lap. Unfortunately, a 3-place grid drop for impeding Kevin Magnussen in Q1. And it was, unfortunately, an impeding incident. I can't disagree with that. You know what I'm like at throwing FIA under the bus at every given opportunity. But this one, sadly for Oscar, was a deserved 3-place grid drop. And maybe lucky it wasn't harsher as well, because Haas were trying to show them the data that they could have actually got into Q2 and were hoping for a harsher penalty. It didn't come, thankfully, for Oscar. But yeah, Oscar Piastri's performance this weekend overall was okay, wasn't it? But nothing special. You know, hindered his own progress with the 3-place grid drop. Started P5, stayed P5, couldn't get past Carlos Sainz. Ferrari went on this weird nothing strategy of leaving him out too long for Sainz so that Piastri could undercut him. And then he stayed in P4, briefly caught up to Leclerc and tried to fight for P3. But cooked his tyres a little bit too much, which is what we saw of him last season, wasn't he? Went too hard too soon on the compounds of tyres and then struggled towards the end to maintain the pace. But yeah, once again, Oscar Piastri proving that he was the right choice. He's certainly learning and developing within that car well. It's his first race that he had the whole full upgrades. He only had half of them at Miami. So it's encouraging to see. The signs are there. The signs are promising for Oscar. But this weekend just didn't quite work out. Would it have been a victory? No, but it certainly should have been a podium. So yeah, for Oscar Piastri, it's going to be 7 for him. Solid 7. Don't want to be too critical, but again, I can't praise him too much because he was sort of the master of his own demise and it started in qualifying. Unfortunate for that. Yeah, you can blame the teams for lack of communication, etc. But at the end of the day, he should know. Get out of the way. Oscar Piastri, a solid 7 to him. And finishing in 5th place, we come to Carlos Sainz. Smooth operator. Smoothish. Oh, not sure. Yeah, Carlos this weekend overall just didn't seem to have the measure over his teammate this weekend, did he? It was very much the Leclerc show. Earlier in the weekend and earlier in the race, I should say as well. He was P4, he was behind Leclerc and was quite happy sat there, but he was saying, look, the McLarens are fast. He sort of knew what was coming, and then Ferrari put him on this ridiculous strategy of Oscar had pitted, he was going to get within his pit window, so they sort of left him out for an extra few laps, but for no good reason, because he was just losing the delta to Piastri more and more. He pitted, he came out, he was behind Piastri. That's where he stayed. It was a good few seconds behind him as opposed to being a second ahead effectively. So he lost loads of time for no real good reason and unfortunately just didn't come through in the end. And P5 was all he could do from there. So yeah, dropped off that fight somewhat. But that was down to strategy. But for Carlos overall, it's going to be a solid 7 to him as well. It was an okay weekend. Wasn't anything special or spectacular. It was just one of those where you think, well, he brought home the points. He didn't have the best strategy in the end, but he didn't have the pace compared to his teammate, so that has to be noted. A solid 7 to Carlos Sainz. Securing 6th place, we come to the first of the Mercedes. It is Lewis Hamilton. Yeah, struggling weekend for Hamilton really, isn't there? A couple of mistakes in practice. He had an off, he had a spin, he had a trip through the gravel in the race itself. He had an excursion as well, bouncing through the gravel. And he only finishes ahead of his teammate George because of the strategy that they put George Russell on, which was to pit him so he could get the fastest lap point, even though he would lose position to Hamilton. You'd have thought they'd have pitted Hamilton because they were safe anyway with the gap they had to the next cars behind. So you'd have thought you'd have pitted Hamilton to give him that point, but as it was, they gave George the pit stop. Anyway, really weird, really confusing. George Russell was questioning it as well, but as it was, it meant that Hamilton finished here in P6 as opposed to the P7 that he deserved in theory. Was out-qualified by George. Was lucky he didn't get knocked out in Q1, wasn't it, actually? He ended up 15th there, so that was quite lucky. But again, just not the usual Lewis Hamilton we're used to seeing, and I don't know if this is because he's just really fed up with Mercedes and he's not been included in the briefings maybe as much as he would have been had he not been moving to Ferrari next season, and whether he is just looking very much forward to 2025 and he's writing off 2024, I'm not sure, but we're not seeing the usual Lewis Hamilton are we this season, it must be said. So I've given him a middle of row 5. Middle of row 5 to Lewis Hamilton for that. Didn't in theory beat his teammate all weekend, just a strategy call at the end there that meant that George Russell finished behind him. It's one of those things. Middle row 5 to Lewis Hamilton. And as already mentioned, finishing in 7th place, we of course come to George of the Russell. watch out for that pit stop. Well, yeah, that was the pit stop that cost him at the end, didn't it? It cost him 1 point, effectively, because he pitted, put the soft tyres on, finished behind Hamilton as opposed to finishing ahead of him. There's a 2-point difference there between the positions, but he did get the point for fastest lap. So, yeah, Mercedes were right to make that call with one of their cars to pick that fastest lap point up. They had no threat from anyone. They were miles behind the top 5. They were miles ahead of 8th downwards. They could have done something with that, and they did, but they chose to pit George over Lewis, and I don't understand that. But nonetheless, George Russell this weekend did what he could with the car he had, maybe, I don't know. Out-qualified Hamilton, out-raced Hamilton for the most part. And, yeah, not much more can really be said for that. So, for George Russell, I've given him a solid 7. Solid 7 to George Russell, that's all he's getting from me. I think that's a fair score, and that's what he's getting. He outraced and did, in theory, beat Hamilton, even though the results at the end don't show it. But, yeah, a solid 7 to George of the Russell. Finishing in 8th place, we come to Checo, Sergio Perez.
People often earmark me as the worst driver in Formula 1. I'd like to see you manage more than 7 laps in an F1 car without getting cramped.
And there we have it. It is, of course, Jean-Denis Delatraz of the week. What a 90s hero that guy was. I've never seen anyone get lapped within 7 laps so much and then have to retire due to cramp. What an incredible effort, Jean-Denis. Your few races within Formula 1 will certainly not be forgotten. But yeah, for Sergio Perez this weekend, pretty much drove like Jean-Denis Delatraz, didn't it, to be honest? What could be said for that? Out in Q2, P11, what a disaster. But he didn't look like he had the pace to do anything better than that. It was like unlucky that he got bumped. The track ramped up massively. It wasn't any of that. It was just a lack of pace all weekend from Perez. And then in the race itself, could do nothing. He started on the hard tyres, then switched to the mediums. Came out P13, something like that, didn't he? Elevated himself into the points rather easily, and then 8th was the best he was going to get because he was almost 30 seconds behind the 2 Mercedes ahead. So that's all he could hope for this weekend after what was a difficult qualifying at a circuit that's difficult to overtake. Disaster. This is the Perez that we saw last year, and it's concerning. It's been solid up until this point, but this one was very Delatraz worthy. So yeah, unfortunately for Sergio Perez, it's Delatraz of the week, and alarm bells are ringing because we're going into Monaco next, and we know what happened there last year. So if this lack of pace doesn't improve, we could see him scoring very few or no points at all, and effectively big question marks are going to be over his Red Bull seat once again. But yeah, Delatraz of the week to Checo. Securing 9th place, we come to Lance Stroll. Oh, woo, bloody hell, get you, Lance, picking up a couple of points. What a delicious bitch. What could be said for Lance overall this weekend? Well, what could be said for Aston Martin, to be honest with you? What a disaster of a weekend they had, really. Brought upgrades to the car once again. More so than they had at Miami, and it's just not worked out again, has it? The upgrades that Aston Martin bring, they seem to lose the way and tumble outside the points and outside anything sort of decent. It was the strategy that recovered Stroll this weekend, it must be said. Without the strategy of the staying out on the mediums for the length of time he did, and then putting the hards on, and then climbing his way through the field, like 25, 26 lap deficit over the next cars. That's what really gained him inside the points, and fair play to him for that, because he had to put himself into that opportunity for the team to make that strategy work. So I don't discredit Lance for that, although it was a strategy game. The driver has to be there to pick up the points. Ultimately, that's how it goes. But yeah, Aston Martin, what the friggin' hell's happening? We've had 2 points, or was it 1 point in Miami? And we've had a couple of points here. It's not good, is it? Not good at all. To be honest, Aston Martin were really lucky that RB didn't score more points than they looked like they promised in the Saturday, because had Daniel Ricciardo and Yuki Tsunoda finished where they qualified, Aston Martin had been outscored and they'll be looking behind them as opposed to trying to look forward for 5th in the Constructors. It's crazy, isn't it? It's madness. But yeah, Aston Martin nowhere. Lance Stroll, to be fair to him, didn't really do anything wrong this weekend and picked up a couple of hard-earned points because of a good strategy call, but him putting himself at the right place at the right time. It's 7.5 I'm giving Lance Stroll for that, because I do think he deserves some praise. 7.5 to Lance Stroll. Last of the point scorers, we come to Yuki Tsunoda in the Visa Cash App Maxi Tampon RB. Don't forget your AlphaTauri Toro Rosso Minardi combination to go with that. And a bit of bullshit sauce on top as well. So for Yuki Tsunoda, picking up 1 point this weekend after a great qualifying once again, getting himself into P8 in the qualifying. Yeah, it looked like they were on for that P8, weren't they, at some stages? But then, unfortunately and ultimately, the strategy that played out with Lance Stroll and Perez meant that they climbed their way above. Which, in theory, you look at that sheet and you look at that qualifying and you think, well, yeah, a Red Bull's definitely faster than an RB. And, of course, an Aston Martin should be faster than an RB. And he finishes up 10th. I don't think there was much more he could do other than that. It's just a little bit disappointing to see him not pick up a couple more points, shall we say. A P8 finish would have been absolutely stunning for him, but as it was, a P10 was really the best they could get realistically with the strategy they were on and the cars that were ultimately behind them. So yeah, Yuki Tsunoda this weekend, once again, a fantastic season by him, wasn't it? Out-qualified Daniel Ricciardo and out-raced Daniel Ricciardo once again. It's 9 points. 9 points to Yuki Tsunoda. I think we have seen a little bit better from him this season so far, but I don't want to be too harsh with him. But yeah, you know, he is really carrying the RB squad. And yeah, once again, it's only a point which they might be disappointed by, but it could be a crucial point come the end of the season. 9 to Yuki Tsunoda. Just outside the points, and how many times have we said that already this season? It's Nico Hulkenberg. Oh, needed that. Yeah, for Nico Hulkenberg in the Haas after qualifying himself in P10, just behind the two RBs. In the race itself, he was running round inside the points. He had a great launch once again, didn't he? And Nico Hulkenberg's been a bit iffy on restarts and starts at times, hasn't he? But these last few races, he has nailed it and gained places, which has really, really helped him in the race. Got himself up as high as P8 briefly at one stage. Haas were an early stopper though, weren't they? They didn't go for that running long period. They went on the hard tyres quite early and then stayed out on those, which was unfortunate. Didn't quite work out their way. Meant they got leapfrogged by the likes of Sergio Perez and, of course, Lance Stroll as well towards the end. Ultimately, you know, once again, a solid race for Hulkenberg, it must be said. I don't think there was much he could have squeezed out of that Haas any more than he could have done. It would have just been nice to see him pick up that point. You know, the way that it worked with the pit stops, he got leapfrogged by Tsunoda, and then after that, it was always just going to be on the fringes of the points. But when Perez and Stroll came through, the point, unfortunately, went begging. For Nico Hulkenberg, I've scored him an overall solid 8. Solid 8 to Nico Hulkenberg. Once again, you know, he's driven really well, really smart, really clever, and was just unlucky with the strategy given that he missed out on a final points paying position. 8 to Nico Hulkenberg. Finishing in P12, an encouraging P12 may I say as well. It is Kevin Magnussen in the second of the Haas's. Now after qualifying himself in P18, Haas believed his lap time would have been good enough for Q2, but he got blocked in Sector 1 before he crossed the sector, so how they could have possibly known that, I don't know. They're just the mini deltas, I suppose. But, you know, it is unfortunate that he get blocked, but ultimately he didn't put the lap in early enough to keep himself secure into Q2, because at the end of the day, that car's a top 10 qualifier. We've seen it with Hulk on numerous occasions now. That car should be nowhere near that bottom 5 in Q1. Kevin Magnussen ultimately starting the race in P18 and was running round fairly at the back. The race itself didn't look to be doing anything special or spectacular, but what they didn't do with Hulkenberg, they did with K-Mag. Left him out there for a long, long time on the medium tyres, was quite happy. In fact, he was on the hards, wasn't he? And then pitted for the mediums at the end. He was stuck behind Zhou for a number of laps, and this is frustrating for me because I think the laps he was stuck behind Zhou because he kept getting blue flags. That was what was happening. So it was close, back of Zhou, hounding Zhou, blue flags, I have to back off. And he'd lose the challenge, lose the battery that he deployed to try and get Zhou, and ultimately, that was where it all started going wrong for him, because at the end of the day, he finished here P12 after coming out the pits in about P16, P17. He made great progress up through the field towards the end, and he was only 4 seconds behind Hulkenberg, who was only a further 6 behind Tsunoda, and I reckon they lost a lot of time in those blue flags and not being able to overtake Zhou. So maybe, just maybe, he could have been a fighting charger there and picking up a point at the end. Maybe unlikely, but, you know, a 10-second deficit when you think how many laps he was stuck behind Zhou could have been possible. For Kevin Magnussen, I'm going to award him 6.5. I'm not saying it was an absolutely outstanding weekend this weekend, and certainly made it more difficult for himself by, once again, another poor qualifying and Q1 exit. But the race itself, it didn't hit anyone, it didn't hit anything, and it was encouraging. Some good signs and good overtakes there. Unfortunately, he was stuck behind Zhou for quite a long time, which wasn't all his fault. Without that, maybe, just maybe, he could have scraped a point. 6.5 to K-Mag. Finishing in an unlucky for some P13, it is, of course, Daniel Ricciardo in the second of the Maxi Tampon RBs. I don't really know what could be said for Ricciardo this weekend. Once again, a Q3 appearance, lining up P9 alongside his teammate. Think bravo, fair enough. The race itself, he slipped down though, didn't he? He slipped down outside the points quite early on, and then he never really was running in them again. Beaten by Yuki Tsunoda again, who picks up a point. So, you know, apart from Miami sprint so far, we have seen nothing at all from Daniel Ricciardo this season, and it really does lay doubt into how he's going to continue with this squad and where he's going to go next. He's not good enough for Red Bull, even when I've just slated Perez. But he's been beaten by Yuki Tsunoda, but Red Bull and RB don't really seem interested in Tsunoda at all as an option. They don't seem to be putting him in the window at all. It's just like, yeah, you're here, and that's only because we've got Honda engines. I think the sooner they lose those Honda engines, how rapidly Tsunoda would be out of that seat, which is unfortunate because he has proved himself. He was given more time than he deserved, but he was given that extra season in 2022, and he's delivered since then. So fair play to him for that. And, yeah, you know, Daniel Ricciardo overall shouldn't have returned to Formula 1. I really don't. But he has done. He's done nothing really apart from Mexico last year, Miami this season so far. The rest of the time he's been beaten by Tsunoda and not doing much at all. I've given him a 6. 6 to Ricciardo. Probably generous by a point, but, you know, he's hardly going to be making waves on the Cruel Room standings this year. It's 6 to Ricciardo, and that's that. Finishing in 14th place, it is Esti Bestie Ocon, Esti Bestie to you, and like Esti Bestie Ocon. P14, really the best that the Alpine squad could do. Q1 looked quite impressive for him though, didn't it? Was Ocon somewhere ridiculous, like P4, P5 at the end of that session, and you think, okay. And then Q2 came along and they sort of just lingered about again and was like not showing any signs of breaking into that top 10 at all really. Lined up P12 for Ocon, P13 for Ocon, something like that, and Gasly at the back in P15. So yeah, you know, it looked promising in Q1 and then slowly unfortunately went begging once again. Didn't look like points were ever going to be possible this weekend for either of the Alpine drivers, it must be said. Yeah, just no pace once again. That one lucky point that they had last time out is really all they're going to get, I think, this season, the way it's going, because I don't think many updates are coming either by the looks of things, unless they're trying to bring one big package in one go. But while ever RB keep picking up a point or two, it just gaps them all the time that little bit more, to make it almost impossible already for P6 in the Constructors. If Haas starts scoring a few more points, then P7's going to be unlikely. So is really the best they're going to get P8? We'll have to wait and see. But for now, for Ocon overall, very lonely race this weekend. He did have a couple of battles and overtakes. Overtook Bottas towards the end, overtook Zhou Guanyu as well. So there was chances and there was a good bit of telly time every now and again, but ultimately for nothing. A solid 7 to Esti Bestie Ocon for that. I think that's as much as I can give him for what was a fairly average weekend, but solid, I guess. Next up, on a very, very lonely 15th position, we come to Zhou Guanyu in the first of the state kick me up the arse Sauber F1 squads. What could be said for his race overall? Again, as mentioned, he had a battle, he had a duel, held up K-Mag for quite a while, so he had some moments of brilliance there. It was just for nothing really worth talking about. You know, he had a fight and an attack with Ocon, he was fighting around with Gasly, fighting around with his teammate, fighting around with Logan Sargeant, so he did have a little bits of battles and bits and pieces going on there, didn't he? But ultimately for nothing for P15. Yeah, Zhou Guanyu is getting 3 from me. I think that's about as fair as I can give him. Don't think it was anything Delatraz worthy. He just wasn't very special or spectacular. There's more in that Sauber. There's got to be more in that car than we've seen this season, but both drivers are letting the side down, aren't they? So it's 3 to Zhou Guanyu. And that's going to be the end of that. Next up, we come to Pierre Gasly in the second of the Alpines. And unfortunately, another weekend where he's beaten by his teammate Ocon. Even though it's for nothing, it's still for pride within the team. Looking like both Alpine drivers are looking elsewhere for 2025 to see where they can end up. But the signings are narrowing now out. The more and more drivers are getting signed with each passing week, or it's going to be interesting to see where they're going to go, but both drivers have expressed their displeasure and want to leave Alpine. I'm not surprised myself, but for Pierre Gasly, done nothing this season, always beaten by Ocon, and in the first couple of races you can say, yeah, fair enough, it doesn't matter, but, we're getting towards, round 7 now we're in, aren't we, and still being beaten by Ocon, still outraced by Ocon. It's a shame. So for Pierre Gasly, I've gone for 4 points. 4 points for Pierre Gasly. I think I've been giving him even scores quite a lot this season so far. But ultimately, you have to compare yourself to your teammate, regardless of the pace of the vehicle. Esteban Ocon has been doing the majority of the out-qualifying, the majority of the out-racing, and has picked up their 1 point so far. Pierre Gasly hasn't looked to be doing that. 4-2 Pierre Gasly. Next up is the first of the Williams in Logan Sargeant.
Okay, so I may have been close to 12 seconds off the pace in qualifying at times, but I promise you, at least 4 seconds of that was down to the car.
And there we have it, Delatraz of the week to Logan Sargeant, because once again, a very, very poor performance by Logan. Qualified in 18th, was it? But then had his lap time deleted due to track limits. I mean, how bad is that, eh? You abuse the track limits and only end up 18th. It's not good, is it? That Williams car is a Q2 qualifier, so lined up last. The race itself was just, once again, nothing from him at all. We saw no life from him. He got about as high as 13th, 14th, but that's because they stayed out a really long time. When he pitted, he came out last, and then he stayed last. So, yeah, he beats Bottas at the end, who had issues at the end, but, it's unacceptable, really, isn't it? It really is. So, yeah, unfortunately for Logan Sargeant, it is Delatraz of the week. He's next on the line, isn't it? James Vowles has already put that to him and said, look, we need an honest conversation here. You're not delivering the goods. And I thought, well, you could have told him that last season and got rid of him. But as it is, they don't look to be getting rid of the driver mid-season from what James Vowles has said. So that's quite interesting. But maybe after this performance, they're reassessing, because that was dismal once again by Logan. So yeah, a Delatraz of the week worthy, trundling round at the back throughout most of the race, did nothing special or spectacular. Lap times deleted, even though he was nowhere near the efforts of getting into Q2, even with the track extending that he did do. Pathetic. Logan Sargeant, Delatraz of the week to him. Then we do come to the last of the runners in Valtteri Bottas, and his race weekend in theory was worthy of a Delatraz of the week, but I have spared him that for the fact that he had issues at the end. His KERS pack, or ERS pack, the energy recovery system basically packed in, so he was running with like 60-70 less brake horsepower in the closing stages, which was like a mobile chicane. You just saw him drop a position, like every half a lap effectively. It was like losing 2 places a lap. He wasn't doing anything special or spectacular. He was running about 13th, 14th, wasn't he? Nothing great. But then when K-Mag overtook him, that's when his issues started. So yeah, not brilliant, not fantastic. And once again, a poor performance by Bottas up to that point. But that moment does save him for me. It does just save him. I can't help a mechanical issue at the end there, unfortunately. So one of those things. But he was getting nothing anyway. He's getting a solitary 1. 1 to Valtteri Bottas, that's all he's worth this weekend. We didn't see anything of him at all. At least we saw Zhou battling and fighting, even if he didn't win, but at least we saw something. Valtteri Bottas, we saw absolutely nothing of. Once again, you forget he's in the race. What's all that about? 1 to Bottas. Then we come to the list of retirements in this race, both in theory choosing to save their cars as opposed to any sort of issues. But the first on this list, the last to retire in the race, it is of course Fernando Alonso.
Out of all my achievements throughout life, being known as one of the worst drivers to ever grace the Formula One paddock has to be one of my proudest.
And there we have it, Delatraz of the week to Fernando Alonso. He had a crash in FP3, which was unfortunate, damage done. It meant he had a compromised qualifying because the car was fixed, but it wasn't as the team would have liked it to be. It was just a rush job just to get him out there, which is more than understandable. And in the race itself, he was trundling round at the back, and that is where he stayed. He had an off, didn't he, as well? He went off through the gravel at one point. I'm sure he did. He had a mistake anyway at some point. Yeah, just at the back, trundling round, nothing special or spectacular, and then retired the car not for reliability reasons, but to save the car effectively. To not put any additional mileage on it when you're not fighting for anything at all was literally P19, almost last, but we had a more unfortunate driver out there. But yeah, unfortunately, Alonso, it all stemmed from that mistake in FP3, which meant a compromised qualifying and then meant a compromised race from there. He could have done more, I'm sure he could have done, but again, the updates that Aston Martin have brought really haven't worked, have they? That's clear to see, and Alonso down here at the back is not what anyone wants to see. So fingers crossed he books his ideas up, fingers crossed that Aston Martin books his ideas up, but this time around there was really no point in Aston Martin showing up this weekend once again, which I've said that twice in a row now, but yeah, they pick up a couple of points, but what's the point? You know, get on top of your car. Alonso, a very unusual and rare off weekend. Maybe it's down to the car as well, being unsteady and unstable, but ultimately stuffed it into the wall in FP3, and that was his race weekend over effectively at that point. And that was that. So yeah, a Delatraz of the week to Fernando Alonso. And then last but by no means least, we come to Alexander Albon in the Williams. What a shame, once again. The Williams squad not doing very well at all this season, are they? Alex qualified P14, which is just sort of where we expect the Williams to be now. And the race itself, it's difficult to say what was going to happen because the first round of pit stops, Alex was an early pitter as well, so maybe he'd have stumbled down the order later on in the race as the fresher tyres came through. We're never going to know, but he was an early stopper. And unfortunately, the front right wheel didn't go on correctly. It was on in terms of it was never going to fall off because it was secured on, but it wasn't seated correctly. So it has pegs that the wheel locates onto. It was on, it was gunned up, but it didn't quite sit on the pegs right. So it meant that it was like, instead of locking like that, it was locked like that, pushing against each other. And it meant that the wheel was loose and it had a bit of travel because it could do that. So, yeah, unfortunately, he had to return back to the pits after a very slow lap into the pits. Went back out a lap down, had to serve a 10-second stop-go penalty for the unsafe pit release, which is fair enough. Your race weekend's over and done with there. He served that. He was almost 2 laps down, and then when he was about to get lapped for the second time, they decided, look, even if we get a safety car, we could only gain a lap back. No point keeping him going, so they pulled into the pits to retire the car, to keep mileage off the car effectively. There was no point running around there for any longer than he needed to. And they gave it every opportunity, but it wasn't to be for a safety car or any sort of the likes to get him back up through the field and try something radical. Alex, although it's been a difficult weekend this weekend, it must be said that he has now signed another multi-year deal with the Williams team, so he was already staying until the end of 2025 anyway. That's been extended by a further 2 years to go to the end of 2027. He's had a very honest and open conversation with James Vowles about the way that Williams are progressing, and even though to us it doesn't look like progress is happening behind the scenes, clearly Alex is happy with the way things are going. James Vowles has obviously really reiterated the fact that, look, it's going to be multiple years before we start getting to where we want to be. This year is the redevelopment programme, and yeah, you're going to have some tough times, but we're with you, we're behind you. We know that Alex obviously appreciates the support that the Williams squad has around him. I think Alex is suited to the Williams role really well, so it's nice to know that he's going to be in Formula 1 for at least the next 3 seasons after this one. And see where he goes from there and see whether Williams can move forward. But for now, unfortunately, another unfortunate race. It's another 05 for Alex. Maximum I can give a DNF driver anyway. But what really could I do? I couldn't see much from it. Qualifying, okay, maybe could have done a little bit better. But ultimately, this race was overdue to no fault of his own. A middle 05 and a maximum I can give a retirement to Alex Albon. So everything, guys, those were the runners and riders of the Emilia Romagna Grand Prix. Let me know your thoughts and feedback down below. Did I score any drivers too high, any too low? The updated standings with the scores I have just awarded are on the screen now for you to take a look at. Have a look and see where your favourite driver is now, and were I harsh with them? Were I maybe a little bit overly generous with some of the scores I have given? Let me know as always in the comments section below. And now let's take a look at the team standings, shall we? They're on the screen for you as well. I'm not altering or changing anything with the teams at the moment. I'm just keeping it as it is for now. The scores are as they are, but if any team majorly screws up, then they will lose points. And if I do decide that the drivers are under-delivering compared to what the car is giving them, I will add bonus points on for them as well. But for now, we're leaving it as it is. We're just going to let the season play out a little bit longer. And that's that, really. A massive thanks, as always, goes out to Dan, formerly of Mushy Gaming, of course, currently running his own YouTube channel name of Dan Bartlett, for providing me with the scoreboards that you see on your screen, for the driver icons that you see in the corner of your screen, and for the intro as well. Without him, this series would be more pointless than it already is. And who can forget Dave, F1 Games PlayStation, for providing me with the of the weeks that you all know and love. So I will see you all for the Monaco Grand Prix, which is this weekend, isn't it? So will it be this Tuesday I'll see you again? Or is it a 2-week break? No, I think it's a double-header, isn't it? So I'll see you next Tuesday at this time again. Fantastic stuff, great. I'll be saying ta-ra to you this time next week. Unbelievable stuff. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for your love and continued support with the series. And I will see you all again very soon. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. And as always, much love.